I want you to welcome to the program. We have author Mary Grabar on the line. Mary, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm so glad that you could spend some time with us talking about this new book that was out this month. I guess it was out 2 days ago, coming out August 20th. It's now the 22nd. Debunking Howard Zinn, exposing the fake history that turned a generation against America. What made you want to write this book, Mary?
Well, I've been wanting to write it for more than a decade. I was teaching college. I no longer am. I'm a resident fellow here at the Alexander Hamilton Institute, but I was appalled by what my college students did not know. I was teaching literature, an American literature survey course, and around 2005, I mentioned that the writer we were discussing, Richard Wright, had written the short story that we were going to discuss during his communist phase. And I got these quizzical looks from about a third of the class. They had never heard the word communist. So, there's appalling ignorance among our college students, and it's just growing worse and worse as Howard Zinn's book becomes more influential, spreads out throughout the education system and in our culture and politics, and keeps selling. I mean, it's a phenomenon in terms of publishing.
So talk a little bit about Howard Zinn's piece, his book, A People's History of the United States, and, when it came about, and, it's almost like people were, they were hungry for something that could tear down America.
Yes, well, his book was first published in 1980. It's been in publication ever since, so almost 40 years ago. And, of course, by 1980, you had the New Left, the Vietnam protesters, the hippies and so forth, the people who were at Woodstock wallowing in the mud, who, went into teaching. A disproportionate number of people of that generation, the ones who were out there protesting, went into academia or teaching. So the groundwork was laid. There were other historians that were like-minded and were putting a left-wing twist on American history. And Howard Zinn's evil genius was to plagiarize those, as I show in my book often, and present it as his own and exaggerate what they were saying. So there are outright lies, plagiarisms, distortion of the original source's views, etc. So he was able to do that as a propagandist, and his book took off. We don't really remember the other people who were writing at the time, but we do have the influence of Howard Zinn.
We're talking with Mary Grabar. She's the author of a book. It's been out for 2 days. You can get it on Amazon. You can see it right there on your screen, Debunking Howard Zinn. So things like, so you're saying when he talks about how Columbus was essentially a genocidal maniac, that maybe that wasn't his original thought. He's plagiarized that from somebody else, but maybe even extorted what they said. So tell me about that. I mean, let's just start with Columbus as an example.
Okay, yes, those are probably the most famous pages, his opening pages of A People's History of the United States. And you read it and you think, wow, this is a real injustice. Columbus and his men landed, and the natives came up and offered them food and gifts, and what did they do? They chopped off their hands, they raped and pillaged, because the natives then couldn't produce the gold they were looking for. And so I'd read this, and I also decided to check out some of the books from his bibliography. He doesn't use footnotes, but he does provide something of a bibliography. And I was reading it one night, one of his books, which is a short paperback for high school students, and I noticed these very striking similarities. And lo and behold, he had plagiarized, basically copied from another source, from Hans Koning's book for high school students on Christopher Columbus. Now, Koning was not a historian. He was a novelist, and he was a socialist, and he was one of Zinn's comrades in the anti-Vietnam War movement. And what I discovered was also that Zinn copied what Koning copied from Columbus's journals. And Zinn very deceptively uses ellipses, the points to show that a passage or a sentence has been deleted. Well, he uses an ellipsis but there are 2 days that are deleted. So what Zinn says is that Columbus wrote about, the native Arawak Indians, as he calls them. They would make fine servants, ellipses. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. Now, that fits into his narrative of him being a genocidal maniac. But what he leaves out pages, but one of the key phrases is, this is what Columbus wrote, "I know that they are a people who can be made free and converted to our holy faith more by love than by force." So that's the opposite meaning of what Howard Zinn presents as Columbus's intention.
Wow.
That is one example.
Wow. And we've got generations of kids. You got parents that scratch their heads like, what happened to my son or daughter when they come back from that first semester of college? And this is the reason why, because you've got this book that's he's based everything on, and he's essentially a fraud. I mean, essentially he's lied, and he's, that's why you have some people that have tried to correct this, and you're one of them, Mary, and I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there have been stabs at him. I think a lot of historians have, picked up his book and looked at it, and it's just an overwhelming task to, go and attack all the lies in it. And so they've had an article here and there. But what I've tried to do is to systematically expose his lies. And the book really is an expose. I object to his anti-Americanism, of course, but I also want to give people a tool. So when, they say they don't like Howard Zinn, and, a leftist or one of his allies says, well, that's just because you have a different viewpoint. Well, no, that's not the case. The case is that he is really a fraud, and that he lies, he distorts, he manipulates, and it's not real history.
I didn't even know this was in Zinn's book. American Indians, he claims were feminists or feminists, and they were sexual revolutionaries ahead of their time. That's an interesting bullet point.
Yeah, well, that's sort of become the dominant view, and he, of course, builds that up. And so if you read Howard Zinn, you would think that, that North America and South America was populated by these tribes of peace-loving proto-hippies living in communes where, and they were feminists, and women made political decisions, and they divided the labor. But that is not the case. I go through, the older sources, and I also go through some contemporary scholarship that shows that, no, in fact, there were, tribes raided other tribes. They killed the men. They took the women and the children. And, it was nothing like that. There was cannibalism. They, if they defeated another tribe in a battle, they, would cut out the heart sometimes and eat it. So, they were not these kind of hippie types that were living in perfect harmony with nature and sharing everything.
Yeah, that never knew violence until, Christopher Columbus, showed them how to be violent. I mean, that goes against human nature entirely, I mean, we'll descend into violent madness, left to our own devices. All humans do. We're talking with Mary Grabar. Again, she's a fellow at the Alexander Hamilton Institute, and her new book that was out, it was released back on the 20th. Today's the 22nd, so it's only been available for 2 days. You need to check this out at Amazon. Debunking Howard Zinn, exposing the fake history that turned a generation against America. I'm really glad when you were talking earlier about the academia and the professors who were wallowing in the mud, at Woodstock. That really is the case. I mean, you got to think about that. I mean, that those folks went into academia, and they already did, being at Woodstock. Not to say that you were at Woodstock that you're, some sort of anti-American, but at that time, a lot of those young people, they were into a kind of a new ideology. I mean, and some people believe that everybody should do drugs. There were some people that believed this. Everyone should do drugs so that we could end a war, or end our violent tendencies. And so it really is I guess a flag post, if you will, a marker for kind of two different paths of thought that really does shape the way we look at events now, right? I mean, it really almost is kind of the beginning of the right and the left that we see today.
Yeah, exactly. We have today the idea that education's purpose is to promote social justice. There's less reading and writing and discussion, rational discussion, and there's protesting. There is rampant activism through our educational system, K through 12 and in college. We were talking about Columbus, and this is coming into our institutions as well. And I noticed that the Smithsonian is co-sponsoring 2 teach-ins that are going to be using Howard Zinn's materials promoted through the Zinn Education Project. And the purpose of these 2 teach-ins is to educate teachers on Howard Zinn's version of Columbus and to promote Abolish Columbus Day. So that's where we are. So it's in, Howard Zinn is in our institutions. He's in the Smithsonian, concerts, public events, publicly sponsored events, NEA sponsored events. It's everywhere.
Well, I have to say this, and I think, there's a lot of parents right now who have just moved their son or their daughter into their dorm room. They did it last weekend here in Arkansas, and so they're doing this all over the country right now. And so I would just encourage parents, maybe they need to buy this book. I think they do need to buy your book, read it, and so if your son or daughter comes home and is taking that philosophy class 101 and is now questioning everything, well, what is it based off of? You know what I mean? Or taking that history class, what is it based off of? And I think this would be a great tool to provide the correct point of view and the truth about American history, Mary.
Yeah, and that's what this book is intended to do. It's to be a tool. It's to provide ammunition because typically, and I'm around a lot of college students here at the Alexander Hamilton Institute, and they get attacked by their professors if they disagree, and the professor will simply say, "Paul, you don't care about social justice. You're a racist. You're a conservative Republican." And you need a comeback. And what I tried to do in this book is go through the major points that Howard Zinn makes. I've done extensive research. I've gone through his sources. I've gone to Howard Zinn's papers at New York University. I've gone to the Library of Congress. I've quoted historians, legitimate historians, both on the right and the left. A lot of leftist professors don't like him and disagree with Howard Zinn, think that he's a fraud. And so I offer this book, and, if any of the professors, would tell the students, well, I know more than you do, well, go back to the footnotes, look it up. There's the documentation, and argue on the basis of facts.
I got one more question for you. You say you used to teach. You're a professor, you taught at the college level, having this accurate version of history, the truth, knowing the truth, Mary, Did you ever find it hard, personally? Were there any consequences for you, kind of knowing that you're kind of in academia and it is that you're the minority, your opinion is the minority?
Yeah, well, I never was able to get a tenured track position, a permanent position. And so I was teaching, on temporary year-to-year contracts, and I've lost jobs because I would publish articles about the corruption I saw, and soon as the department chair got wind of it, or in one case, a college president, I was told, well, there were no more classes available for me to teach the following semester. So I was drummed out, and, any conservative these days, if they can get in, it's usually as a temporary, a very low pay, no benefits. And if you are outspoken, or even if you, don't go along with them and agree in their conversations, you will find yourself not called back.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, I'm glad that you've done this. I'm glad you've written this book. It's going to be a big hit. It's going to be a helpful tool. Mary Grabar, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Best of luck, and hopefully we can talk again sometime.
Okay, yeah, I'd love that. Thank you.
Mary Grabar, everybody. Debunking Howard Zinn. It's up at Amazon right now, exposing the fake history that turned a generation against America. This is a valuable tool, especially in light of it's back-to-school season. And, your kids in high school are going to get some of this stuff, too. You forget about that. Your kids in high school are going to get some of this stuff as well. I mean, real quick, Columbus was not a genocidal maniac. Was, in fact, a defender of the Indians. You ever heard that before? No? Why the American Indians were not feminist, communist, sexual revolutionaries ahead of their time. How the United States was founded to protect liberty, not white males' ill-gotten wealth. Why Americans of the greatest generation were not the equivalent of Nazi war criminals. How the Viet Cong were not well-meaning community leaders advocating for local self-rule, and why the Black Panthers were not a civil rights organization. Again, this would be a good thing for all of us to have and get.